Hey guys, tonight we're going to step into the past, into the shadow of the Black Death, and walk a mile in the very bizarre, very stinky boots of a medieval plague doctor. You're trudging through streets thick with the smell of death and fear. Your every step bringing you closer to a job where your main duty isn't to heal, but to count the dead and, frankly, get paid a small fortune to watch people die. It's a career path you've stumbled into out of desperation, but you quickly realize the money isn't worth the misery and the absolute horror that awaits you. You probably won't survive this journey, but at least it's a story to tell, maybe to the other side. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your new life begins with a letter, an official-looking parchment from the town council, sealed with a blob of hot wax. It's your official appointment as the city's newest, and maybe only, plague doctor. This wasn't a medical degree you earned, it was more like a lottery you won. One where the grand prize is a front row seat to the apocalypse. You remember your training, a brief apprenticeship with a barber surgeon who taught you how to pull a tooth and apply a poultice. Now, you're supposed to be a savior. Historians still argue whether these plague doctor roles were created out of genuine public health concern or simply to provide a psychological crutch for a panicked populace. But for you, it's a paycheck, a surprisingly generous one at that. You're officially a public servant, hired on a contract to treat both the rich and the poor. And you're getting paid about 4 times what a regular physician would. It sounds like a sweet deal until you realize the job description is less about medicine and more about record keeping. Your primary task is to log the number of deaths each day and document new cases of the plague. A truly cheerful daily agenda. Your first official act isn't to see a patient, but to collect your gear from a grim-faced town official. You're handed a bag that clinks with a few metal tools and a massive, heavy wool coat. The coat is the first sign that this isn't going to be a walk in the park. It's a full-length, waxed leather or heavy canvas garment that feels like it weighs more than you do. You're told it will repel the disease, though you have no idea how. It's meant to protect you from the miasma, the bad air that everyone believes is the cause of the plague. It's the kind of logic that makes sense to a medieval mind. If the air is bad, you need to wear something to keep it away. You slip it on, and the scratchy wool immediately makes you itch. You also get a thick, wide-brimmed leather hat, the kind a shepherd might wear. But it's meant to identify you as an official plague doctor, a sort of macabre uniform to let everyone know you're the guy who comes to see you when you're about to die. You get the distinct feeling that you're less a healer and more an omen. The one-size-fits-all approach to this getup is a little unchic, if you will. You're also given a cane, which you're told is for examining patients without touching them, and also for keeping a safe distance from panicked, desperate crowds. It all feels less like a doctor's kit and more like a collection of props for a very, very depressing play. You walk through the streets, the weight of the coat and the knowledge of your new job settling on you. Your new role is a strange mix of prestige and pariah. You're an essential public figure, but people cross the street to avoid you, clutching their cloaks to their noses. The job is technically for life, or at least for as long as the plague lasts, which feels like forever. Your contract promises you will be well compensated, and that's a good thing, because you're starting to suspect this money is less of a salary and more of a life insurance payout. A quirky fact about your job: in some cities, the town would even pay for your lodging and food, but only in a quarantined section of town, isolated from everyone else, so you wouldn't infect the healthy people. Your first real task, before even meeting a patient, is to put on the rest of your uniform. You're told this is the most important step, a ritual of protection. You're already sweating under the heavy wool coat, but now you have to deal with the accessories. First, the leggings and tunic, made of the same waxed material. They feel like a second, unbreathable skin. You pull on the thick leather gloves, reaching up to your elbows, and the world suddenly feels muted and clumsy. It's like trying to do delicate work with oven mitts on. And finally, the mask. This isn't just a simple piece of cloth. It's the plague doctor's most famous, and most useless, accessory. You pull it out of the bag, and it feels surprisingly light. Made from hardened leather, it's shaped like a bird's beak, long and pointed, and it has 2 small eye holes covered with glass. You place the mask over your face, and the world instantly transforms into a claustrophobic, distorted view. The glass panes fog up almost immediately with your breath, and the long beak makes it hard to see anything below your nose. The air inside the mask is stale and hot, and you can already feel sweat trickling down your temples. You're told the beak is the most critical part, as it's meant to be filled with aromatic items to purify the air you breathe. The reasoning is that the plague is spread by miasma, a sort of foul, noxious air, and if you can make the air you breathe smell sweet, you won't get sick. It's a simple, elegant piece of flawed logic. You're essentially wearing a medieval air freshener on your face, hoping it's enough to fight a microscopic enemy no one even knows exists. The beak's contents are a bizarre collection of items you've been given. You stuff in dried flowers like roses and carnations, herbs like mint and sage, and spices like cloves and cinnamon. There's also camphor and a few other pungent oils to really amp up the scent. The smell is overpowering, a floral assault on your senses that makes you want to sneeze. But you're told to just bear with it. You look in a small, cracked mirror and see your reflection, a grotesque, bird-like figure that looks more like a horror movie villain than a healer. It's an unnerving sight, and you can only imagine what a terrified, fever-addled patient will think when you waddle into their room looking like this. You're not a symbol of hope, you're a harbinger of doom. You might even feel a little bit like you're in a low-budget cosplay. But the gravity of the situation quickly reminds you this is all too real. Historians still argue whether the beak mask was just for air purification or if it also served a psychological purpose. Was it meant to be a terrifying, almost supernatural figure to command respect and fear? Or was it simply the best anyone could come up with at the time? Either way, the thing is an absolute nightmare to wear. You can't breathe, you can't see, and you're starting to sweat so much that you feel like you're inside your own personal sauna. The glass eye holes, which are meant to protect you, only serve to limit your vision and make you feel disoriented. You can see why so many of your predecessors in this job didn't last long. A quirky fact about the materials: sometimes, plague doctors would use bits of straw, or even ground up insects, mixed in with the herbs. The belief was that the smell of these things would either repel the bad air or somehow absorb the disease. You're pretty sure that just made the mask smell worse and added an extra layer of grossness to an already unpleasant situation. You adjust the hat, which you've secured with a string under your chin, and pick up your cane. The cane isn't just for prodding patients, it's a way to move things around. To lift a bedsheet or push a curtain aside without having to use your precious gloved hands. It's your only physical connection to the world around you. A sort of sterile extension of your will. You take a deep, stinking breath of potpourri and step out into the street. The first house call awaits, and you can already hear the faint cries of a family in distress. Your first house call is to the home of a wealthy merchant. You know this because of the intricate carvings on the door and the fact that his servant, looking terrified and clutching a silk scarf to his face, is the one who leads you inside. The air is thick with a mixture of sickness and the lingering scent of incense. An attempt to ward off the miasma that's clearly failed. You're told the merchant has been feverish for 2 days, and now he's covered in black, swollen lumps, the buboes that give the bubonic plague its name. Your training, if you can call it that, didn't cover this. You were taught about humors and balances, not grotesque swellings and unstoppable fevers. You can feel the sweat dripping down your back under the heavy coat. And the smell inside your beak is starting to feel nauseating rather than protective. You step into the chamber and see the merchant, his face pale and clammy, his body racked with shivers. His wife, her face streaked with tears, is clutching a small crucifix, her prayers a low, frantic murmur. This isn't what you signed up for. You were supposed to be a professional, a detached observer, but the reality of the situation is visceral and overwhelming. The buboes are the size of a pigeon egg, maybe even bigger, and they're leaking a foul, dark fluid. You have to force yourself not to gag. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from your history class? This is worse, a lot worse. You use your cane to prod the bed, to push a blanket aside, and to point to the merchant's arm. A grotesque landscape of bruised skin and horrifying lumps. You can't bring yourself to touch him. The whole thing feels like a macabre stage play. You, the masked monster, facing a family in the throes of their personal hell. Your job is to observe, to document, and to pretend you can help. You ask the wife to describe the symptoms, writing them down on a small parchment with a quill you brought along. You can barely hold the quill with your thick gloves, and the ink smudges, making your notes a messy blur. You log the merchant's condition, the color of his skin, the location of the buboes. This isn't medicine, it's a ledger of death. You feel a pang of guilt. You're getting paid handsomely to do nothing more than be a witness to a family's grief. Historians still argue whether some of these plague doctors, despite their limited knowledge, genuinely tried to help or if they were merely bureaucratic functionaries. For you, in this moment, it's a terrifying mix of both. You want to help, you really do, but you have no idea how. You can't tell the family that you're just a bureaucrat in a weird costume, here to count the bodies. So, you give them a few useless instructions. Tell them to keep the room well ventilated, to burn some herbs in a bowl, and to pray. You know it's a pathetic effort, a way to make yourself feel less useless. But it's all you have. A quirky fact you learned in your brief training is that some physicians would suggest applying a paste made from dried frogs and vinegar to the buboes. The idea was that the cold, damp frog would draw the bad humors out of the body. You briefly consider suggesting this to the family, but decide against it. It sounds completely insane, and you don't even have any dried frogs on you. Another joke you heard from a senior plague doctor was that the best treatment for the plague was a strong dose of Sprint until you don't see a plague doctor anymore. He was probably right. You jot down a final note and turn to leave, the servant quickly backing away as you approach the door. The air in the house feels heavy and hopeless, and you know, deep in your gut, that this merchant won't see the morning. You're not a healer. You're just the person who came to say goodbye. You've made a few more calls, and they've all been variations on the same theme: fevers, buboes, and a deep, gnawing sense of helplessness. Now, you're at the home of a tailor, a man of lesser means but still an honest, hard-working citizen. His daughter is sick, and this time, you're not just observing. The family is begging you for some kind of cure, some form of intervention. You remember the few treatments you learned about and know, with a heavy heart, that they're all probably useless. But you had to do something, if only to give them some semblance of hope. The first thing you suggest is bloodletting. The idea is that the disease is caused by an imbalance of the humors, the four fluids in the body: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. If a person is sick, it's because one of these humors is out of whack. And clearly, with all the dark, black buboes and general feeling of being unwell, there must be too much bad blood. So, you take out a small, sharp lancet from your bag. You tell the tailor to hold his daughter still. With your clumsy gloves, you try to find a vein in her arm. The girl is thin and weak, and you can barely feel the pulse. You make a small incision and watch as a few drops of dark blood ooze out. You collect it in a small bowl, and the tailor and his wife watch with bated breath, as if this act alone will be the miracle that saves her. The girl whimpers in pain, and you feel a new, awful kind of uselessness. You know, with absolute certainty, that this isn't going to work. It's a trick, a show to make them feel like you're doing something. Historians still argue whether bloodletting did more harm than good, but you can feel it in your bones that it's a terrible idea. All it's doing is making her weaker. You try another remedy you were told about. You ask the tailor if he has any live chickens. He looks at you, bewildered, but a neighbor quickly brings one over. The chicken is a squawking, confused mess, and you're pretty sure it's going to make a scene. The treatment is to shave a patch on the chicken's backside and then strap it to the bubo. The logic, if you can call it that, is that the chicken will draw the poison out of the patient's body. A quirk you were told about this is that if the chicken gets sick and dies, it means the treatment is working. The chicken is now your colleague, your coworker in this bizarre, awful office. You're holding a screaming chicken and a tiny, terrified girl, and you think to yourself, how did my life get here? You manage to secure the chicken to the bubo with some rags, and the poor bird pecks at the skin. A surreal and horrible spectacle. You just hope the chicken doesn't get peckish and decide to make a snack out of your patient. It's a grotesque joke you make to yourself, but there's no one around to laugh. Another one of the cures you're aware of is to have a patient drink a vile concoction of ground-up emeralds mixed with water. The belief was that the precious stone, when ingested, would absorb the poison. You didn't even bother to suggest this one. You don't carry emeralds in your bag of tricks. You also know about the use of leeches, which are a different version of bloodletting, and the application of a paste made of human excrement and flowers, which is a remedy that is just as gross as it sounds. None of it is science. It's all superstition and guesswork. And you're the one on the front lines, pretending this madness makes sense. You look at the family, their desperate hope shining in their eyes, and you feel a profound sadness. You're a performer in a cosmic tragedy, and your only job is to be the best damn actor you can be. The tailor's daughter is not your only patient, of course. Your days are a blur of these desperate house calls, each one a different window into the chaos and superstition that has gripped the city. The people aren't just looking for a cure, they're looking for a miracle. And they'll try anything. You see it all. The family of a baker has a sick boy, and they've hung a bag of stinking, rotting herbs around his neck, believing it will ward off the evil spirits that have caused the disease. You're pretty sure it's just making the boy nauseous, but you don't say anything. What's the point? Their hope, however futile, is all they have left. A woman with a fever is being bathed in a mix of vinegar and rosewater by her terrified husband. The pungent smell doing nothing to alleviate the sickness. It's all based on the same flawed logic. The disease is an outside force, a bad smell, a demon, and the cure must be a strong smell, a prayer, or an absurd ritual. You see a group of flagellants walking down the street, whipping themselves with leather scourges, their backs a bloody mess. They believe the plague is God's punishment for their sins, and by punishing themselves, they can appease His wrath and save the city. You have to step back into an alleyway to avoid their procession. The sight of their self-inflicted wounds a new kind of horror. It's a terrifying spectacle, a mob of people inflicting pain on themselves in a desperate attempt to find a reason for the senseless death around them. It's a horrifying kind of hope, a tangible expression of their fear. You feel a sudden, cold sense of loneliness. You, the man in the strange bird mask, are a figure of science, or what passes for it, in a world that has devolved into a frenzy of superstition and religious mania. The belief in miasma, the bad air, is so strong that people are doing all sorts of ridiculous things to combat it. They burn aromatic woods and resins in the streets, creating a thick, smoky haze that makes it hard to breathe. They carry pomanders, small balls filled with fragrant substances, and hold them to their noses. It's a city that smells like a mix of death, fear, and 1,000 different potpourri scents. You can't help but feel a strange kind of pity for them. They're doing the only thing they know how to do to survive, even if it's utterly useless. A quirky fact you learned is that in some towns, people would even walk around with live birds in cages, believing that the bird would absorb the bad air before it could reach them. You can't help but picture a medieval man walking through the streets with a canary on a string. A tiny, feathered shield against the apocalypse. It's a silly image, but the sadness of it is overwhelming. Historians still argue whether the extreme religious fervor and superstition that gripped Europe during the Black Death were a direct cause of a greater spread of the plague, by bringing people together in large, unhygienic gatherings, or simply a symptom of the widespread despair. As you stand in that alleyway, watching the procession of flagellants, you're pretty sure it's a bit of both. The belief that they're being punished for their sins, that they deserve this, is a new, cruel kind of torture. And you, the man who is supposed to be the cure, are a living symbol of their failure. The crowds part for you not out of respect but out of fear. As if you, too, are an omen of bad things to come. You're a pariah, a living ghost in a city of the dying. You pull your beaked mask down a little tighter, hoping the smell of cloves can block out the smell of fear. The crushing weight of your job isn't just the sight of the dying, it's the profound uselessness you feel. You are, in every sense of the word, an imposter. You were hired on the thinnest of credentials. A brief, informal training that wouldn't even qualify you to be a modern-day paramedic. You remember the curriculum, how to prepare a few herbal poultices, how to set a simple bone, and how to mix a plaster for a cut. That's it. There was no discussion of contagion. No mention of germ theory because it didn't exist. You were a barber surgeon's apprentice, a glorified handyman of medicine. And now, you're the city's last hope. The irony is as thick as the miasma everyone is so afraid of. You're a cog in a bureaucratic machine. A symbol of a failing government trying to appear in control. A quirky fact you learned is that in some cities, a plague doctor's official title wasn't even doctor, but communal physician for the plague. A title that sounds much more like a public servant than a medical professional. Your training was so short and so unscientific that it feels almost insulting. It was a couple of weeks of watching a man with a steady hand pull teeth and cauterize wounds with a hot iron. You were taught that the body was made of humors, and disease was an imbalance of those humors. The cure, therefore, was to restore the balance. This led to practices like bloodletting and the use of leeches, which, as you've seen, are not only useless but probably harmful. You were also told that some diseases were caused by astrological alignments and that others were the work of a curse. It's a medical philosophy that feels less like science and more like a combination of gardening and fortune-telling. You're a believer in none of it, but you're paid to act as if you are. This lack of proper medical knowledge is a double-edged sword. On one hand, you're not as arrogant as the university-trained physicians, who are often too proud to see patients in plague-ridden areas. A mainstream historical fact is that many of the most highly educated doctors fled the cities during the plague, leaving the less trained and more desperate to take their places. This is how you, a person with no real training, got the job. On the other hand, your ignorance makes you a walking liability. You're trying to heal people with a cane and a vague memory of how to mix some herbs. It's a brutal reality check every time you walk into a new house. You're a fraud, and you know it. The only thing you can do is your primary job, to document the deaths. The town council needs a record of the dead to know how bad things are. And you're the one they've entrusted with that gruesome task. You're not saving lives, you're counting them. Historians still argue whether the medical community's failure to understand the plague was due to a lack of technology or an intellectual stubbornness. Was it that they couldn't see the germs? Or that they were too attached to the ancient Greek ideas of humors? For you, walking through the streets in your ridiculous bird mask, the answer is simple. They were all just as helpless as you are. The fancy doctors with their expensive books, and the barber surgeons with their rusty tools, were all just throwing darts in the dark. You are, in every sense of the word, a symbol of a failed system. A bad joke you heard from a gravedigger was that the only thing a plague doctor really knows how to do is look good while being completely useless. You don't have the heart to tell him he's wrong. You just nod and move on to the next house. The weight of your own incompetence heavy on your shoulders. You're beginning to understand that the tools of your trade are less about healing and more about maintaining a facade. In your bag, you have your lancet for bloodletting, a few small vials of herbs and oils, and a simple scalpel. You also have a small notebook and a quill for your record keeping. But your most important tool, the one you use more than any other, is the wooden cane. It's about 5 feet long, with a blunted end. You're supposed to use it to point to a patient's buboes, to examine their state from a distance, or to turn them over to see if there are any more swellings. A mainstream historical fact is that the cane was also used to keep panicked family members at a safe distance and to push back the desperate crowds that would often follow you through the streets. You're using it now, to poke at a patient's clothes, to check for fleas, and to keep a respectful but safe distance. The cane is a symbol of your isolation. It's an extension of your body that keeps you from touching anyone, from offering a comforting hand, from connecting with the people you're supposed to be helping. It's a sad, lonely tool, and you feel its weight in your hand every time you use it. A quirky fact you learned is that some plague doctors would have a hollowed-out cane, with a small compartment in the handle where they would keep a few strong-smelling herbs. If their beaked mask got too hot or too smelly, they could just uncork the cane and get a new, fresh whiff of something. The scalpel is for lancing the buboes. You've heard from a few other doctors that the only way to save a person is to cut open the swollen lumps and drain the foul fluid inside. The logic is that the poison will flow out of the body, and the patient will be cured. This is one of the more gruesome tasks you have to perform, and you dread it. The buboes are hot and inflamed, and you know cutting into them is going to hurt. You've seen a few of your colleagues try this, and the results are mixed. Some people seem to get a little better, while others just get a new, infected wound. You're pretty sure this is a placebo effect at best, a way for the patient and their family to feel like they're doing something. It's a terrible kind of hope. Historians still argue whether lancing the buboes was ever a good idea. Some argue that it provided relief from the pressure and pain, while others believe it simply spread the infection and created more open wounds for the bacteria to enter. For you, it's a terrifying gamble. You have to decide, in each case, whether to try it or not, and you're making that decision with no real knowledge or training. It's a horrible, impossible choice. You can't just stand there and do nothing. But you also know that your actions might be doing more harm than good. You're a walking, talking ethical dilemma, and your cane is the only thing keeping you sane. A little joke you tell yourself is that your medical bag is less like a doctor's and more like a janitor's. Full of useless tools for a job you're not qualified for. You just hope no one asks you to clean up a patient's room. 2. You're a healer in name only. And your only real purpose is to be a statistician of death. Your tools are not for saving lives. They are for keeping records and keeping a distance. The cane is for fear. The lancet is for show. And your notebook is for counting. You're a walking, talking symbol of the world's helplessness in the face of this terrible plague. As you trudge from one sick house to another, the city itself becomes a character in this grim story. You're not just seeing individual cases of the plague. You're witnessing the complete breakdown of social order. The streets that were once bustling with merchants and families are now eerily quiet. The few people you do see are shrouded in cloaks, their faces covered, and they give you a wide berth. The air is heavy with a miasma of fear and decay. The scent of wood smoke and 1,000 different funeral pyres hangs in the air. A constant reminder of the unseen enemy that stalks the city. A mainstream historical fact is that the Black Death led to a mass exodus from many major cities, with the wealthy and powerful fleeing to the countryside, leaving the poor and the sick behind. You pass homes with red crosses painted on the doors, the macabre symbol of a family in quarantine. Sometimes, you see a lone figure standing outside, their face a mask of grief, a silent sentry waiting for the inevitable. You pass carts piled high with bodies, their drivers calling out, "Bring out your dead," in a low, monotone chant. The sight is so commonplace now that it barely registers as a shock. It's just a part of the daily grind, the background noise of an apocalyptic world. The graveyards are full, and the city has resorted to digging mass graves. Trenches where bodies are laid side by side. A horrifying tapestry of the city's population. You've seen gravediggers, their faces covered in rags, trying to keep up with the overwhelming number of deaths. You also see the other side of the collapse. You see opportunistic thieves breaking into abandoned homes, taking what they can. You see people who have given up, sitting in the middle of the street, waiting for the plague to take them, their will to live gone. The once strict social hierarchy has been turned on its head. The beggar and the nobleman are now equals in the face of this disease. The plague doesn't care about your wealth or your title. It takes anyone and everyone. A quirky tidbit you've heard is that in some cities, the wealthy would hire people to go to the market for them, and they would pay in gold and jewels. But the people would not take the money out of fear of contagion. So they would have to find a way to take the goods without touching the money. Historians still argue whether the breakdown of social norms was a sign of a society in its death throes or a necessary adaptation to an unprecedented crisis. You can feel the answer in the emptiness of the streets and the desperation in people's eyes. This isn't an adaptation, this is a retreat. A retreat from life, from hope, from everything that made the city a place to live. You feel a strange sense of detachment, as if you're a ghost walking through a world of ghosts. The city is a cemetery, and you are its caretaker. A bad joke you heard from a street urchin was that the best way to get a good meal in this town is to wait for a plague doctor to pass and then get a bite of his leftovers, since he's the only one who has any. It's a joke, but you know it's not that far from the truth. The irony is, you're not eating well yourself. You're too afraid to touch anything, to eat anything, and your meals are a constant source of anxiety. The social isolation is not just something you observe in others, it is a profound, constant reality for you. People give you a wide berth on the streets. When you enter a home, the healthy family members, if there are any, back away into corners, clutching their noses and their religious icons. You're not a doctor, you're an omen. You carry the stench of death with you. Even with all the fragrant herbs in your mask, you are a walking symbol of the plague itself. And everyone, from the lowliest peasant to the highest ranking official, knows it. It's a lonely, lonely existence. You don't get invited to sit down. You don't get offered a cup of water. And no one dares to shake your hand. You are, in every sense, a pariah. A mainstream historical fact is that plague doctors were often required to live in isolated quarters, away from the general population, to prevent the spread of the disease, or at least to give the illusion of it. You walk through the streets, and you see the looks of fear and disgust on people's faces. It's a fear that's not just for the disease, but for you. You are a reminder of the fragility of life, of the futility of their prayers and superstitions. A quirky tidbit you've heard from a fellow doctor, from a distance, of course. No one gets too close, is that in some towns, children would sing a song about the plague doctor. A haunting little tune that would go something like, "Doctor, doctor, where's your beak? I can hear the fever shriek." It's a cruel, childish rhyme, but it's a testament to how you are seen, not as a healer, but as a morbid curiosity, a figure from a nightmare. Your work is not just emotionally and physically draining, it's a constant, gnawing reminder of your own isolation. You go from one home to another, and you're always alone. You eat your meals in silence, and you sleep in an isolated room, your dreams haunted by the faces of the dying. You can't talk to anyone about what you've seen because there is no one who can understand. Your only companions are the dead and the dying, and they're not great conversationalists. You long for a kind word, a gentle touch, but you know you'll never get one. You are, in every sense, an outcast. You are the man who walks with death, and death is not a good companion. Historians still argue whether the social isolation of the plague doctors was a necessary evil or a form of social punishment. Was it an efficient way to contain the disease? Or was it a way for a terrified public to externalize their fear? For you, the answer is simple. It's a form of torture. It's a way for a society to put you in a cage and say, "You are not one of us. You are a thing of the plague." It's a lonely life, and a short one, and you're pretty sure that's exactly what the town council intended. A little joke you tell yourself is that you're the most popular person in town right now. No one will ever be a bigger conversation starter than you are. You know it's not funny, but you say it anyway, just to remind yourself that you're still a person. As you continue your grim rounds, you start to see the plague for what it truly is, not a single disease, but a multifaceted monster with a few horrifying faces. The most common, and the one you've seen the most, is the bubonic plague. You're used to the sight of the buboes, the grotesque, swollen lymph nodes that give the plague its name. They start as small, painful lumps in the groin, armpits, or neck, and then swell to the size of an egg, sometimes even an orange. They're hot to the touch, and often, they burst, releasing a foul-smelling black fluid. You've heard from your few isolated colleagues that some people actually survive this, but their recovery is slow and their bodies are left scarred and weakened. For most, the fever and pain are so intense that they die within a week. Then there is the septicemic plague. This one is much more terrifying because it works so fast, and there are no outward signs like the buboes. The bacteria enters the bloodstream directly, causing a rapid, systemic infection. The victims get a high fever, chills, and they start to bleed from their orifices, the nose, the mouth, the eyes. You've seen a few of these cases, and the sight of a person bleeding from their eyes is a kind of horror you won't ever forget. Their skin turns a mottled, bruised black, and they die within a day or two, sometimes even just hours after the first symptoms appear. This is the version that gives the plague its name, the Black Death. It's fast, it's brutal, and you're pretty sure you can't do anything about it. You just stand there, a helpless witness to a person's life draining away from them. The third, and most terrifying, version is the pneumonic plague. This is the one you dread the most. It's a respiratory infection, meaning the bacteria spreads through the air, from a person's cough or sneeze. This is the one that proves the whole miasma theory wrong. The people you're visiting aren't getting sick from a bad smell, they're getting sick from each other. The victims get a severe cough, a high fever, and they cough up a foamy, bloody sputum. The disease spreads like wildfire, and the victims are often dead within a day or two. You've seen entire families wiped out by this. A chain of death that moves from one person to the next in a horrifying, inescapable sequence. You have to be extra careful with these patients, keeping your distance and trying not to inhale their breath. It's a terrifying kind of medical game of Russian roulette, and you're the one holding the gun. A mainstream historical fact is that the pneumonic plague was the least common form. But it was the most lethal and the most feared. It was a terrifying realization for people that the disease could spread through the air. And it led to even more panic and social breakdown. Historians still argue whether the bubonic, septicemic, and pneumonic plagues were all caused by the same bacteria or if there were other factors at play. For you, the answer is irrelevant. All you know is that each one of them is a different kind of monster. And your job is to face all of them. A quirky tidbit you've heard is that in some villages, they would put a bucket of water next to the bed of a sick person, hoping that the bad air would be absorbed by the water and not go to the other people. It's a sweet but ultimately useless gesture. And you know it. The daily grind of your work is a relentless, soul-crushing cycle. You wake up, put on the heavy, hot gear, and step into a world that feels like a tomb. Your days are measured not in hours, but in the number of houses you visit and the number of death certificates you sign. The work is repetitive, and the outcome is always the same. You walk into a house. A person is sick, their family is terrified, and you know there's nothing you can do. You take their temperature with a hand on the forehead. You check for buboes. You ask questions you already know the answers to. And you write down the information in your notebook. And then you leave. You leave them to their fate. And you go to the next house. And the next. And the next. A mainstream historical fact is that many plague doctors would visit dozens of houses a day. And their daily death toll could number in the hundreds. The emotional toll is immense. You're a witness to an endless parade of human suffering. You see a mother holding her dying child. A husband pleading for his wife's life. A whole family lying on the floor, too sick to even cry out for help. You have to be a rock, a detached observer. But you're not. You're a person. And you feel the weight of their pain. You feel their terror, their desperation, and their ultimate hopelessness. You see their hope when you walk in the door. And you see it drain away when they realize you're just another witness. Not a miracle worker. A quirky tidbit you've heard is that some plague doctors would carry a small, smooth stone in their pocket and would rub it when they felt overwhelmed. A sort of medieval stress ball to help them cope with the endless stream of death and despair. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of the Black Death led to a mass increase in mental illness. Was it a form of mass hysteria? Or was it a completely understandable response to an unimaginable tragedy? For you, it's not a question. It's a daily reality. The world is mad, and you are a part of it. A joke you heard from a cynical undertaker was that the plague doctor's job is a lot like being a weatherman. You predict a lot of bad things. You're usually right, and no one really likes you. You can't help but laugh at the morbid truth of that. You're just a forecaster of doom. A grim statistician in a world of endless pain. The emotional weight of your job is starting to make you feel numb. You're becoming desensitized to the suffering. And you hate yourself for it. You pass a house where you know a child is dying. And you don't even feel a pang of sadness anymore. You just feel tired. You're a ghost in your own life, walking through a world of ghosts. And you're starting to wonder if you'll ever be able to feel anything again. The endless cycle of death and despair is a kind of plague in itself. And it's slowly eating away at your soul. You just hope that one day, you'll be able to close your eyes and not see the faces of the dying. But you know that's a wish that won't come true. As your tenure as a plague doctor stretches on, you realize your duties extend far beyond the realm of pseudo-medicine. You're no longer just a healer or a death counter. You're also a de facto undertaker, a sanitation worker, and a town official. Your cane is no longer just for examining patients from a distance. It's also for directing people, pointing out where to put bodies, and keeping a frantic mob at bay. Your waxen coat and leather gloves are not just for your protection. They're also a kind of official uniform that gives you the authority to issue orders. You are, in every sense, a man of death. A mainstream historical fact is that plague doctors, in some cases, were tasked with overseeing the burials of the dead, especially when gravediggers were in short supply. You find yourself doing this more and more often. You are now a supervisor of the dead. You have to oversee the digging of mass graves, making sure the bodies are laid to rest in an orderly fashion. You have to make sure the carts are not overloaded and that the drivers are not trying to cheat the system. You have to make sure the houses of the dead are sealed and sometimes even burned to the ground. This is a job that is as depressing as it sounds. You're not just a witness to death, you're an active participant in it. You are a part of the city's mechanism for dealing with the plague. And that mechanism is as brutal as it is efficient. A quirky tidbit you've heard is that in some villages, people would tie a rope around the leg of a dead person and would pull them into the grave from a distance, believing that this would prevent the disease from spreading. It's a sad, desperate ritual, and you've seen it more than once. Historians still argue whether the extreme measures taken during the plague, such as burning houses and mass burials, were effective in stopping the spread of the disease or were simply a sign of a society's panic. For you, it's not a philosophical question. It's just a part of your daily job. You have to make sure the houses are burned, and you have to make sure the graves are dug. You don't ask why, you just do it. A little joke you tell yourself is that your job is like being a firefighter. But instead of putting out fires, you're just making sure they burn hot enough to consume the whole house. It's a dark, cynical joke, but it's one of the few things that keeps you sane. The line between healer and undertaker has blurred to the point of being invisible. You're a man of medicine who spends more time with the dead than the living. You're a symbol of hope who is really just a bureaucrat of death. You're a man who is supposed to save lives but is really just a cog in the machine that counts the dead. You are a walking paradox, a man of life in a world of death, and you're starting to wonder if you'll ever be able to see the world in any other way. The plague has not just taken the lives of the people around you, it has also taken your own. The constant fear of your own mortality is a suffocating blanket that never leaves you. You're a man who is supposed to be immune to the disease. But you know your protection is a lie. The heavy coat, the clumsy gloves, the ludicrous beak mask, they're all just a psychological crutch. A flimsy shield against an invisible enemy. You know, deep in your gut, that the disease doesn't care if you have a contract from the town council or if you're wearing a costume. It will take you just as easily as it takes everyone else. A mainstream historical fact is that many plague doctors, despite their elaborate costumes, contracted and died from the very disease they were hired to fight. Their protection was, for the most part, a total sham. You feel it in your bones every day. You feel the constant, gnawing anxiety that every cough, every sneeze, every ache in your body is a sign that you've finally caught it. You're hyper-aware of your own breathing, your own temperature, your own pulse. You're living in a state of constant, low-grade panic, and you know there's no way to escape it. You can't just quit. You signed a contract, and the town council will not take kindly to a man who abandons his post. Besides, where would you even go? The plague is everywhere. You're in a prison of your own making, and the only way out is through a door you don't want to open. A quirky tidbit you've heard is that some plague doctors would carry a small, caged bird with them, believing that the bird's chirping would be a sign that the air was still good. And if it stopped, it meant the miasma was too strong and they should flee. You wonder if any of them actually did it, or if it was just another of the city's many cruel jokes. Historians still argue whether the high death rate of plague doctors was due to their close contact with the sick or a result of their own lack of proper hygiene and understanding of disease transmission. Was it the job that killed them, or was it their own ignorance? For you, it's a terrifying question. You don't know the answer, and you're pretty sure you don't want to. A little joke you tell yourself is that you're the most expensive ghost in town. And when you die, you'll be the only one with a death certificate signed by yourself. It's a joke, but the laughter is hollow. You are just a man, and you are just as mortal as everyone else. The plague doesn't care about your costume or your title, it just cares about taking another life. And you know, deep in your soul, that you're next on the list. You look at the faces of the people you pass on the street. They are afraid of you, but you are just as afraid of them. You're afraid of their coughs, their sneezes, their touch. You are a walking symbol of death. And you are just as terrified of it as everyone else. You're a man who has looked into the face of death so many times that you no longer see a stranger. You see a reflection of yourself. And you know that your time is running out. Your final patient call is to the home of a young girl. No older than 7. Her name is Eleanor. She's not from a wealthy family. Or a poor one. Her father is a carpenter. And her mother is a laundress. They're just a regular, working-class family caught in the crossfire of a world that has gone mad. You've seen hundreds of sick children by now. But there's something different about this one. She's not a grotesque, feverish mess. She's just a little girl, with a pale face and large, frightened eyes. She's too weak to even cry. And she just stares at you with a silent, haunting plea. The sight of her breaks something inside you. All the emotional walls you've built. All the cynicism and detachment you've cultivated. All of it comes crashing down. You're no longer just a plague doctor. You're a human being looking at a child who is about to die. You see the beginnings of a bubo on her neck. A small, red lump that will soon swell and burst. You know what it means. You know there's no hope. Her parents are on their knees, begging you to help her, to do something, anything. You want to tell them the truth, that you're a fraud, that you have no cure, that you're just a bureaucrat of death. But you can't take away their last hope. So, you do the only thing you can. You take out your lancet, your heart a stone in your chest, and you tell them you will try to drain the poison. It's a futile, barbaric act, and you know it, but you have to do something. You make a small cut, and a few drops of dark blood ooze out. The girl whimpers, and her parents watch with bated breath. Their faces a mix of hope and terror. You wipe the blood away with a rag, and you tell them that you have to let the bad humors out. You give them a few useless instructions to keep her warm, to give her some herbs to drink, and you leave. You leave them to their fate. And as you walk out the door, you hear the mother's low, sobbing prayer, and you know, with a terrible certainty, that this is the last time you'll ever see that family. This final patient is a culmination of everything you've faced. The uselessness of your job, the absurdity of your costume, the terror of the disease, and the profound sadness of a world in chaos. You are not a hero, you are a witness. You are not a savior, you are a funeral director. You are a man who has traded his humanity for a paycheck. And you're not even sure if it was worth it. As you trudge through the empty streets, the weight of your own existence feels heavier than the coat on your back. The last patient you saw, little Eleanor, is the final nail in the coffin of your career. Not because she died, she will. You know she will, but because she reminded you that you're still a person. And that's a dangerous thing to be in this world. The humanity you've been trying so hard to suppress has come roaring back. And it's a terrifying thing. You're walking down the street now. The sun setting, casting long, grotesque shadows of you on the empty cobblestones. The city is quiet, and the only sound is the shuffling of your own feet and the rustle of your heavy coat. You're not going to another house. Your shift is over, but you know, with a terrible certainty, that the work will never be over. The plague will continue its march, and you will continue your grim routine until it takes you. 2. Your mind drifts back to the beginning of your career. The initial excitement, the promise of a good wage, the feeling of being an essential part of the city's life. You were so naive. You had no idea that you were signing up for a life of isolation, fear, and profound sadness. You thought you were a healer, but you were just a bureaucrat of death. You thought your costume was a shield, but it was just a uniform for a ghost. You thought you were saving lives, but you were just counting the dead. A mainstream historical fact is that the average tenure of a plague doctor during a major outbreak was often less than a year. You've been at this for a few months now, and you know, deep in your soul, that you won't last much longer. The wind picks up, and the glass eye holes in your mask fog up even more. You can barely see now, and it feels appropriate. You've been walking in a haze of fear and despair for so long that you can no longer see the world clearly. You're a man who has lost his purpose, his humanity, and his hope. All you have left is your costume and your grim ledger of death. A quirky tidbit you've heard is that in some cities, the plague doctors would write poems about their experiences and would leave them in the graves they helped dig. A kind of morbid diary for no one to ever read. You think about doing it, but you're too tired. You just want to take off the costume, wash your hands, and go to sleep. Historians still argue whether the plague doctors were heroes or cowards. Were they brave men who risked their lives for the good of their city? Or were they opportunists who profited from the suffering of others? For you, the answer is a lot more complicated. You're neither. You're just a man who made a bad choice. And now you have to live with it. A final joke you heard was that the plague doctor is the only man in town who has to carry his own funeral shroud with him every day. You know it's not a joke, and you feel the weight of your coat as if it were a shroud. Now, find a quiet place to sit, maybe a comfortable chair or the edge of your bed, and let yourself just sink into the stillness. The sounds of the city, the cries of the sick, the creaking of the death cart, they all fade away now, replaced by a gentle quiet. You are no longer in the medieval world of death and despair. You are safe. The heavy wool coat is gone. The bird mask is a distant, unsettling memory, and the suffocating scent of camphor and herbs has been replaced by the comforting smell of your own home. Let the anxiety of the day, of your journey, of the history we just explored, just melt away. Close your eyes, and let your breathing slow down. The story is over. The pages are closed. The past is where it belongs. And you are here, in the gentle, quiet present. Just breathe. Let the darkness of the past fade into the soothing darkness of a good night's rest. You are safe now, and the horrors of that world can't follow you here. Sleep. Let the peace of this moment wash over you, and let your mind drift away into a place of comfort and dreams. There's nothing left to fear. You are safe, and it's time to rest.